you for having me. Thank you, Martino, Irene, and Alessio for inviting me. Well, so much has been said already. I do hope I still have something to add. As Alessio said in the beginning of the day, we're looking today at the question of how students can learn from art institutions and also how art institutions can learn from students. And I do really agree with your opening remarks also that we have to look at schools as democratic institutions, look beyond institutional thinking and into network thinking. That is something I will touch upon in my talk. And at Witte in Rotterdam, where I am responsible for the education programs, we are trying to propose to go a step further and to make school together with educational institutions, like the universities, for instance. In order to do this, my counter question is, what does it mean to be able to think, work, and operate across domains? And to illustrate this, I will introduce our project Studium Witte, which is an educational catalyst aimed at bridging various fields of knowledge across higher education to explore and map the political ecology of our time. We present lectures, debates, symposia, and other workshops, all in collaboration with partner institutions like the Rotterdam Erasmus University, the Polytechnical University of Rotterdam, and Delft University. Let me see if this works. There we go. First, briefly, Witte. This is the art center where I work. It is a place which was established in 1990. We focus on developments in contemporary art. We do not have a collection, but we work with artists to produce new projects, new exhibitions, which comment on the social and political predicament of our times. Some examples to give you an idea of the projects we do. This is a project we did with Chuji Jie, a Chinese artist, really a polymath, who is entangled in exploring different temporalities and geographies. This is a project we did 2 years ago with Douglas Copeland. He is mostly known as a writer of Generation X, a book that got him defined as like a visionary of our near future. And he was the first resident artist at Google, which you can see the result of in the foreground here with Putin on a robot. And for instance, this is a project with Michael Portnoy where we emptied out the entire exhibition spaces and only had people present performing live. So we really tried to traverse different bridges of programming. To get us started on the story of Studium Witte, we have to look at two converging developments in art and education, at least in the Netherlands, and I hope that you recognize this also here in Italy. And these two developments are, on one hand, the disappearance from arts, from education, and on the other hand, the disappearance from education from art to a certain extent. And I'll explain both of these concepts briefly. Now, for the disappearance of arts from education, we have to look at knowledge. Knowledge has become the trading commodity of choice, replacing land, raw material, and cheap labor to a certain extent. And in the course of this project, schools in the Netherlands are increasingly cutting back on the arts in their curriculum. So there's less and less attention for arts. And this has to do, I believe, with with an ideal of the school as the site where a person is produced that is ready for a job in the future labor market, right? And art is not seen as part of a potential job in this. This is something we are presented with, and I feel that this is something we need to work against. We need to make space to produce the unsettling and seemingly useless and indeed democratic forms of knowledge that the arts excel in. Think of these non-functional thoughts my colleague mentioned. The kind that throw us back on our tacit assumptions, challenge worldviews, and which really question what is to be learned. At the same time, however, there's also a disappearance from education from the arts. And this is maybe a more challenging concept to understand. Because what is happening is that in a bid to push back against this paradigm of capitalization in schools, right, of the idea of schools as producing institutions of labor force, we see that the arts are positioned in this element as the one thing that enables students to develop themselves, to find their own creative identities, right, their individual characteristics. Now, this is also problematic, because what if this individual voice that the student develops is racist? What if this creativity that the student develops is destructive? And what if this identity that we are striving to develop is purely egocentrical? Art education and working with schools, I believe, is not only thinking about how we learn, but also really thinking again about what is to be learned. Questions need to be raised, such as, is what I desire desirable for my own life, for the planet, as we heard this morning in the presentation about ecology and water scarcity, and for others, is what I desire desirable? We need to think about not only how we are learning, but also what we are teaching. So what to do? These are very large questions and to problematic developments. A starting point for Studium Witte de Wit, for me to think about this, was thinking about knowledge. Now, when knowledge is tooled towards a specific purpose, it is also isolated. And we see this happening more and more in our education system, but also in our systems of governance or commerce. Now, in his book, Interdisciplinary Cultural Analysis, Jonathan Culler introduces a concept of knowledge which is different from this isolated knowledge. It is defining knowledge as the corpus of works that is unbounded and which succeeds in challenging and reorienting our thinking in domains, and that's the crucial part, other than to those which it belongs. We have to see knowledge not as this fixed point of reference, but as the tool that actually enables us to reorient thinking in other domains. Now, in order to start this, and I'll give some practical examples as well from Studium Witte de Wit, how we try to approach this. We started collaborating with schools in Rotterdam. This is the Rotterdam Art Academy, the Willem de Koning. And in 2013, we started a collaborative project called the Read-In series. And this is a school where students are tooled very well in dealing with the visual arts, in dealing with images, but they have very little opportunity to engage with theory. So we started a reading group, which we collaborated on with the professors of the University of the Willem de Koning Academy, with the Creating 010 Knowledge Center, and we started close reading with art students, critical theory and philosophy, trying to bridge these different fields of knowledge. We tackled topics like in the first year, collapsology, accelerationism, the question of how our present is under pressure and is under collapse in terms of speeding up. Deleuze and Guattari, you see their work here, and we combined with images the students presented. And we proposed this text to read. So myself from the Art Center, university, professors of the art school. But then at the end, we always turn it around. And we give the students the floor at our art center to propose a symposium, a colloquium, where they get to invite speakers and thinkers who they would like to hear respond to these kind of topics. And this always brings about very interesting programming. The other way around as well, this is the Erasmus University College, Liberal Arts and Sciences College. And here students study who know very well how to deal with text and critical theory. They write excellent essays, but the image in itself is something they hardly can deal with, right? And these are the future leaders of tomorrow, right? The university colleges is something that's always pitched as the school where Obama went, right? It's this idea. There's really little quality in terms of dealing with images. So we started to do image reading sessions where we try to teach students how to deal with the image. I won't go into this too long. We have to keep it a bit short at the end of the afternoon. But these were still projects with individual schools and with individual students, and we wanted to see how we can cross these domains and how we can make that knowledge truly interdisciplinary. In the course of this, I read this book by Richard Sennet. I think really one of the seminal thinkers of our time, a sociologist, and it's called The Craftsman. In this book, he positions the idea of the craftsman as a new contemporary idiom, which we have to revalue. And the title of my talk was also taken from Sennet. And as a response to this, we started a project called the Witte class of 16, where we asked where does learning to cooperate in a non-linear way begin? How to delve deeper? And for this project, we invited students from all over the Netherlands to apply to follow Witte for an entire year. From over 100 applicants, we selected 8 or 10 who got to follow Witte, but also co-program with us to not only teach the students, but also to have the institution learn from what these students are working on. Now we had participants from Rotterdam, from our universities, from art schools, but also from different cities in the Netherlands, from the Delft Technical University, from the Maastricht History Department, all over, and a lot of them were also international students. They started to actually really program at Witte and make events, which even surprised us. This is an event done last year. It's called How Not to Be Seen. It was a response to an exhibition by Judy Radul, a Canadian artist who was looking into image production. And here you see the participants, or rather you don't see the participants of the class, who are practicing how to disappear in plain sight. So this is but also, they started to make connections, so the students started to make connections with their own universities and our programming, and this was really interesting. For instance, the art world, we have you could say a thing, I think, with language, about how we express ourselves and also how the art world institutionalized language. So as a response to this, the students of the class of Witte organized a project called Contested Tongues, in which they were investigating the over-coded language in the corporate world. They had a professor, which they studied with, who wrote a PhD thesis on the speech of central bank directors, which turned out, in terms of its structures and its language patterns, not to be dissimilar from this international art English that you can sometimes encounter. But this goes on, right? So more projects. This is the mindless identity of the world. We see one of the participants speaking, looking at how to reclaim the body, how to reclaim identity, actually proposing to us, right, the concepts that need to be talked about in the art world, right? And proposing what is there to be learned. Not only the art center as the sending institution or the art center as the inviting institution, but the art center as the receiving institution where learning is concerned. Now, in order for this to work, for such a system to work, I think we need to look at the work of a Flemish pedagogist. He's called Gert Bista, and he says learning basically is dependent on these 3 qualities. First, it starts with trust, and this is something that is really, think about it, you really have to trust the other person. If you are only in a mode of wanting to get your own message across, you will not get anywhere. If you are already sure of the outcome of what will happen in learning, you will not get anywhere. Right? You have to have trust. Trust is that trust is inherently includes a risk that the outcome of any learning process, of any cooperation, has an effect on all of those involved, not only the learner, also the teacher. Both desired effects, but also undesired effects can be the result. Who has not found themselves changed through the interaction with the other? What is needed to enable us to deal with risk, with this kind of risk, is trust. Trust is that which is needed to engage in situations where we do not know what will happen in a constructive way. Now, trust is not blind trust, right? You have to think of a framework, but neither is it not just calculated risk. And I really want to emphasize this. If you have an institution and you want to make educational projects actually have a lasting impact and change, you have to go beyond this calculated risk. In order to truly learn and to fashion a collaboration with the school that goes beyond the corpus of a single domain, trust without ground is needed. Now, the second concept that will enable us to find a common language to really think across individual domains is the notion of violence, the notion especially attributed to Derrida. He says that the core of the education process is the principle of taking responsibility for the subjectivity of the student. Education has a crucial role to play in confronting learners in what and who is different from themselves. Right? Education cannot be about sameness, it has to be about difference. And this is especially relevant where it concerns partners who already have developed internalized systems of knowledge. A relation is instituted only in a case where there is a kind of a precedental violence. In other words, learning to cooperate is not always a pleasant process. Right? It is about challenging each other with difficult questions, with otherness, with confronting participants with individuals' difference. That, of course, also means a huge responsibility. Because working together, if that, as we have seen, is an extremely difficult sometimes and risky and violent affair, by definition it implies a huge responsibility for an education and for any institution to take on. On one hand, this is why, for instance, the school system changes so slowly. Because it bears a huge responsibility. This is something the arts has to be aware of, that if we truly engage in education, this comes with huge responsibility. Plurality and difference are inseparable from the human condition. In the question how we take responsibility for this plurality, which defines how we shape society, we have to take responsibility for the uniqueness of each of the individuals who is involved. How are we time-wise? Yes, so I'll move on to my closing remarks. These are some notes by one of the participants on what we actually do at Witte de Wit. In our studium, we tried to create a new language around disciplined forms of knowledge. At the moment, talks are ongoing to converge these collaborations into structural collaborations with the schools I mentioned, trying to make school together. Not to go to a school with the museum only or invite a school to come to us, but to jointly actually make school. And not forget that the word school in its Greek origin also comes from the idea of undetermined time, right? School in Greek doesn't mean anything more than undetermined time. Time we do not have to yet functionally apply. It is about creating possibilities and locating values which allow for a reorientation of the ways by which existing social structures, divisions, and equalities are reproduced, and about challenging our thinking in domains other than to which we belong. I'd like to conclude with the title of my presentation, which, as I said, I took from Richard Sennet, the sociologist, and he says, community life is easy. All it takes is finding people who think like you do. Now, cooperation, that is hard, because it is about learning, and it is about learning to live with people who think differently. Thank you very much.